The coffee mug slipped from my fingers and shattered against the kitchen floor, ceramic pieces scattering like my last shred of dignity. Julia didn't even look up from packing her overnight bag, her manicured fingers folding silk blouses with the precision of a surgeon preparing for an operation. "Careful, Mark. You're making a mess again," she said, her voice carrying that particular tone I'd grown to despise, the one she used when speaking to incompetent children or her husband. I knelt down, picking up the larger pieces, watching her reflection in the fragments. Even distorted by broken ceramic, she looked perfect. Julia Garvey had always been the kind of woman who turned heads in grocery stores and made other wives unconsciously straighten their posture. At 38, she possessed the sharp intelligence of a corporate lawyer and the calculating nature of a chess grandmaster. "Where exactly is this retreat again?" I asked, dropping the ceramic shards into the trash with deliberate clinks. "The Ocean View Resort. I told you yesterday." She zipped her bag with finality. "Alan thinks the paralegal team needs intensive training on the new case management software." Alan Ryder, senior partner at Whitmore, Daniels & Associates, where Julia worked as head paralegal and I managed their IT systems. Alan, with his silver hair and $1,000 suits, who drove a BMW and lived in the kind of house featured in architectural magazines. Alan, who had been finding increasingly creative reasons to keep Julia working late. "Funny thing about that resort," I said, standing up and brushing dust from my knees. "I called them yesterday to surprise you with flowers. They don't have any reservation under Whitmore, Daniels & Associates." Julia's hands stilled for exactly 2 seconds. In anyone else, it would have been unnoticeable. But I'd been married to this woman for 12 years. I knew her tells. "You must have called the wrong place. There are several Ocean View resorts along the coast." She resumed packing, her movements slightly more aggressive now. "Really, Mark, checking up on me, that's beneath even you." "Beneath me?" I leaned against the counter, adopting the casual pose that had become my armor over the years. "I thought I was already at the bottom of your hierarchy." She turned then, her green eyes flashing with the kind of anger that used to make my pulse quicken. Now it just made me tired. "Don't start with your victim routine, not today." She grabbed her car keys from the counter. "I work with professionals, Mark. Men who take charge, who make decisions, who don't spend their weekends tinkering with computers like teenagers." The words hung in the air between us like smoke from a house fire. I could have pointed out that my tinkering paid for half our mortgage. I could have mentioned that my IT consulting brought in more money than her paralegal salary. Instead, I smiled. "You mean men like Alan?" "Yes, exactly like Alan." Her voice dropped to that dangerous whisper that preceded her most devastating attacks. "Alan is successful. Alan is confident. Alan doesn't need his wife to explain basic social interactions to him at dinner parties." She stepped closer, close enough that I could smell her perfume, the expensive kind Alan had given her for Christmas, the bottle she thought I hadn't noticed. "I need a man who's stronger than you, Mark, in every way that matters." The silence that followed was deafening. Somewhere in the distance, a lawnmower started up, and Mrs. Henderson's dog began its morning barking ritual. Normal sounds from a normal Saturday morning in our normal suburban neighborhood, where normal couples had normal arguments about normal things. But there was nothing normal about the way my wife had just looked at me like I was something she'd found stuck to her shoe. "Have a wonderful retreat," I said finally, my voice steady as granite. "I hope you learn everything you need to know." Julia grabbed her bag and headed for the door, her heels clicking against our hardwood floors with military precision. She paused at the threshold, not turning around. "I'll be back tomorrow evening. Try not to burn the house down while I'm gone. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories." The door closed behind her with a soft click, and I was alone with the morning light streaming through our kitchen windows and the growing certainty that my marriage had just officially ended. I walked to the window and watched her load her bag into her silver Honda Accord, the car I'd surprised her with last Christmas, complete with a GPS tracking system I'd installed for security purposes. Julia had been so touched by my concern for her safety. My phone buzzed. A text from my mother. "Don't forget dinner tomorrow. Your father wants to discuss the playoff predictions." I deleted the message without responding and opened my laptop instead. The GPS tracking interface loaded smoothly, showing Julia's car as a blue dot moving through our neighborhood. According to the display, she was heading toward the interstate, the route that would take her to the Ocean View Resort. Except she wasn't. The blue dot turned left onto Maple Street, then right onto Riverside Drive. I knew that route. Every IT professional in town knew that route. It led to Hillcrest Estates, where the lawyers and doctors lived in houses that looked like something from a magazine spread. It led to Alan Ryder's house. I closed the laptop and reached for my phone, scrolling through my contacts until I found the number I'd never thought I'd actually use. Sophie Ryder had given it to me at the firm's Christmas party during one of those awkward conversations between spouses who had nothing in common except their partner's workplace. She answered on the second ring. "Mark, this is unexpected." Sophie's voice carried the kind of cultured accent that came from expensive boarding schools and European summers. She was everything Julia aspired to be: old money, effortless elegance, and the kind of confidence that came from never having to worry about mortgage payments. "Good morning, Sophie. I hope I'm not calling too early." "Not at all. Alan left for his golf game an hour ago. What can I do for you?" I took a breath, knowing that the next words would change everything. "I think we need to talk about our spouses, about what they've been doing during those late nights at the office." The silence stretched for several seconds. When Sophie spoke again, her voice had changed, sharper, more focused. "How much do you know?" "Enough. The question is, what do we do about it? Come over. Alan won't be back until this afternoon, and I think it's time we had a proper conversation." I hung up and looked around our kitchen, at the coffee maker Julia had insisted we needed, at the expensive knife set she'd bought for dinner parties we never hosted, at the life we'd built that was apparently not enough for her. My phone chimed with a GPS alert. Julia's car had stopped moving. The location showed 1247 Riverside Drive, Alan Ryder's address. I grabbed my keys and headed for the door, but not before stopping at my home office. The printer hummed to life, spitting out several pages of GPS tracking data, time-stamped and dated. Call it insurance. As I drove toward Hillcrest Estates, I couldn't help but smile. Julia thought she was so clever, so sophisticated in her deception. She'd always been the smart one in our relationship, the one who planned and strategized while I just followed along. But she'd forgotten something important about her husband. I wasn't just some bumbling IT guy who fixed printers and reset passwords. I was the man who built the systems that ran her entire world, and I knew exactly how to tear them down. Sophie Ryder's house looked like something from a home and garden magazine, all clean lines and expensive landscaping, with the kind of understated elegance that screamed serious money. I parked my truck behind her silver Mercedes and tried not to feel intimidated by the pristine driveway that probably cost more than my annual salary. She answered the door before I could ring the bell, dressed in cream-colored slacks and a silk blouse that probably cost more than Julia's entire outfit. But her perfectly composed face couldn't hide the tension around her eyes. "Mark, thank you for coming." She stepped aside to let me in. "Coffee?" "Please." Her kitchen was a masterpiece of marble and stainless steel, with the kind of appliances that belonged in restaurants. She moved through it with practiced efficiency, preparing coffee with the same precision Julia used for everything else in her life. "How long have you known?" she asked, not turning around. "Suspected? About 3 months. Knew for certain? As of this morning, when I watched her drive straight here instead of to her supposed work retreat." Sophie set a cup in front of me, real china, not the everyday mugs Julia and I used. "I've suspected for longer. Alan's been working late more often, taking more business trips, and then there are the credit card statements." "What kind of charges?" "Restaurants I've never been to. A jewelry store downtown. He claimed it was for a client gift. Hotel rooms when he was supposedly staying late at the office." She sat across from me, her composure cracking slightly. "I hired a private investigator last month. What did you find?" Instead of answering, she slid a manila envelope across the table. Inside were photographs. Alan and Julia entering a hotel, leaving a restaurant, sitting in his BMW in what looked like intimate conversation. The timestamps showed dates going back 4 months. "Professional quality," I said, examining the images. "Your investigator knows his business." "Her business. And yes, she's very thorough." Sophie sipped her coffee, studying me over the rim. "The question is, what do we do with this information?" I pulled out my phone and showed her the GPS tracking data. "Julia thinks she's being clever. She has no idea I can monitor every move she makes." "You've been tracking her?" "Security feature I installed in her car. She was so grateful for my concern about her safety." I couldn't keep the bitterness out of my voice. Ironic, considering the biggest threat to our marriage was sitting right next to her. Sophie set down her cup with a soft clink. "I want him to pay, Mark. Not just financially, though the prenup will take care of that. I want him humiliated. I want everyone at that firm to know exactly what kind of man he really is." "And Julia?" "Your wife made a choice. She chose to pursue a married man, knowing full well he had a family. I have no sympathy for her." I leaned back in my chair, studying this woman I'd barely known before today. Sophie Ryder had always seemed like the perfect corporate wife. Elegant, supportive, content to stand beside her successful husband at firm events. but the woman sitting across from me now had steel in her voice and calculation in her eyes. What did you have in mind? Alan values two things above everything else: his reputation and his career. Both depend on the respect of his colleagues and clients. She stood up, walking to a window that overlooked her perfectly manicured garden. What if that respect disappeared? You want to expose the affair publicly. I want to expose everything. The affair, yes, but also his other indiscretions. The expense account irregularities, the client entertainment that crosses ethical lines, the promises he's made to your wife about her future at the firm. I raised an eyebrow. Promises? According to my investigator, Alan has been telling Julia he'll leave me and make her a partner in the firm. Neither of which will ever happen, of course. Alan would never give up his lifestyle, and the other partners would never accept a paralegal as an equal, no matter how talented. The pieces were starting to come together. Julia's increased confidence, her dismissive attitude toward our marriage, her certainty that she deserved better. It all made sense if she believed she was about to become the wife of a senior partner. She has no idea what she's really gotten herself into, I said. None whatsoever. Alan has been feeding her fantasies while having no intention of following through. When this falls apart, she'll lose everything: her job, her reputation, and her marriage. And Alan? Sophie smiled, and for the first time since I'd arrived, she looked genuinely happy. Alan will discover that some mistakes have permanent consequences. We spent the next hour planning. Sophie had resources I couldn't have imagined: the private investigator, contacts at the firm, and most importantly, access to Alan's personal files and communications. I had technical skills and intimate knowledge of the firm's computer systems. I'll need to be careful, I said as we reviewed our strategy. Any changes to the firm's systems will be logged and traced back to me. What about personal devices? Alan's laptop, his phone? If I can get physical access, I can install monitoring software. But it would have to look accidental. Maybe a routine maintenance update that includes additional features. I can arrange that. Alan brings his laptop home every weekend, and his phone is always sitting on his desk during meetings. We were interrupted by the sound of a car in the driveway. Sophie glanced at her watch and frowned. He's early. I gathered the photographs and GPS printouts, stuffing them back into the envelope. Back door? Through the kitchen. There's a path that leads to the street behind us. As I headed for the exit, Sophie caught my arm. Mark, I want you to know this isn't just about revenge. Julia and Alan have been playing games with people's lives, treating us like obstacles to their happiness. It's time they learned that actions have consequences. I nodded and slipped out the back door, making my way through her garden to the path she'd mentioned. As I walked back to where I'd parked my truck, I could hear Alan's voice from the front of the house, cheerful and oblivious. My phone buzzed with a text from Julia. Arrived safely. Long day of training ahead. Don't wait up. I deleted the message without responding and drove home, my mind already working through the technical details of what Sophie and I had discussed. The firm's network security was robust but not impenetrable, especially for someone with administrative access, and Alan's personal devices would be even easier targets. But first, I had a more immediate problem to solve. Julia would be home tomorrow evening, expecting me to play the role of the understanding husband who believed her retreat story. I needed to be prepared for that performance while simultaneously beginning the systematic dismantling of her new life. I spent the rest of the day in my home office, creating what I privately called my insurance policy: detailed documentation of Julia's movements, copies of suspicious credit card charges, and a timeline of her late nights at the office. Everything was stored on encrypted drives and backed up to secure cloud storage. By evening, I had enough evidence to confront Julia directly, but confrontation wasn't the goal anymore. Sophie was right. This needed to be about consequences, not just revenge. My phone rang around 9 o'clock. Julia's number appeared on the screen. Hi, honey, I answered, injecting just the right amount of warmth into my voice. Mark, hi. I just wanted to check in. The training sessions are intense, but very informative. In the background, I could hear what sounded like a television and the clink of glasses. Not exactly the atmosphere I'd expect from an intensive training retreat. That's wonderful. I know how much this means to your career. It really does. Alan has been so supportive, really pushing for the paralegals to get advanced training. He thinks I have real potential for advancement. I'm sure he does. There was a pause, and I wondered if she'd caught something in my tone. But when she spoke again, her voice was as smooth as ever. I should go. Early morning tomorrow. Love you. Love you too. I hung up and stared at the phone for a long moment. 12 years of marriage, and she could lie to me as easily as ordering coffee. The woman I'd fallen in love with, or thought I'd fallen in love with, had been replaced by someone I barely recognized. But that was fine, because the man she'd married was about to become someone she'd never seen before. I opened my laptop and began typing, starting with a simple email to myself. Project Stronger Man, Day 1. Tomorrow, Julia would come home expecting to find the same predictable husband she'd left behind. Instead, she'd find a man who was finally ready to play the game by her rules. And I intended to win. Julia returned home Sunday evening with the satisfied glow of someone who'd spent the weekend at an expensive spa rather than an intensive training retreat. She breezed through the door carrying takeout from Romano's, the Italian place downtown that cost twice what we normally spent on dinner. "Thought I'd treat us," she said, setting the bags on our kitchen counter. "The retreat was exhausting, but so worthwhile. I feel like I learned more in 2 days than I have in months." I helped her unpack the containers, noting that she'd ordered my favorite dish without being asked. Guilt or habit? With Julia, it was hard to tell the difference anymore. "Tell me about it," I said, opening a bottle of wine. The good stuff she'd been saving for special occasions. "Oh, you know how these things are. Lots of technical presentations, team-building exercises. Alan really pushed us to think outside our comfort zones." She launched into an elaborate description of workshops and seminars that sounded remarkably detailed for someone who'd spent the weekend at Alan's house. I had to admire her preparation. "Sounds like Alan really invested in this training," I said, twirling pasta around my fork. "He did. He's very committed to professional development. Some of the other partners think he spends too much on staff training, but Alan believes in nurturing talent." Nurturing talent. That's one way to put it. Julia looked up sharply. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing, just that he seems very hands-on with his management style." "Alan is a professional, Mark. Just because you've never had a mentor who believed in your potential doesn't mean everyone else's success is suspicious." The barb hit exactly where she'd intended, but I just smiled and refilled her wine glass. "You're absolutely right. I've always been more of a behind-the-scenes person." We finished dinner with Julia describing her weekend in increasingly elaborate detail. I nodded and asked appropriate questions, all while mentally comparing her story to the GPS data showing her car parked at Alan's house for hours at a time. After she went upstairs for a bath, I retreated to my office and opened my secure laptop. Sophie had sent an encrypted message. "Package delivered, installation successful." The package was a routine software update I'd prepared for Alan's laptop, complete with legitimate security patches and one very special addition, a keystroke logger that would record everything he typed, including passwords, emails, and private messages. My phone buzzed with a text from Rob Mann, my best friend since college and the owner of Mann's classic car restoration downtown. "Beer tomorrow? Need to hear about your weekend." I texted back, "Definitely, lots to discuss." Rob and I had been friends for 15 years, ever since I'd helped him set up the computer systems for his garage. He was one of the few people who knew exactly how unhappy my marriage had become, though I'd never told him the full extent of Julia's transformation. Monday morning brought the usual routine, Julia rushing to get ready for work while I prepared breakfast and packed her lunch like a dutiful husband. She kissed my cheek before leaving, the same perfunctory gesture she'd performed every morning for years. "Working late tonight," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Alan wants to debrief about the retreat with the whole paralegal team." "Of course he does." I waited 30 minutes after she left, then drove to the firm. My IT office was in the basement, a windowless room filled with servers and networking equipment that most people avoided. Perfect for my purposes. The keystroke logger had been active for less than 12 hours, but Alan was apparently an early riser. I scrolled through his captured data, looking for anything interesting. What I found was better than I'd hoped. Alan's emails revealed a pattern of expense account irregularities going back months. Client dinners that were actually personal entertainment, hotel rooms charged to cases that didn't require travel, and consulting fees paid to companies that existed only on paper. But the real treasure was in his personal messages. Text conversations with Julia that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship, including detailed discussions of their weekend together and plans for future meetings. Even better were the messages with other colleagues, including disparaging comments about firm clients and unethical promises about case outcomes. I copied everything to encrypted storage and began preparing what I privately called my insurance portfolio, a comprehensive collection of evidence that would destroy both Alan's career and Julia's future at the firm, but I wasn't ready to use it yet. Sophie and I had agreed that timing was crucial. We needed to wait for the right moment when maximum damage could be achieved with minimal risk to ourselves. That moment came sooner than expected. Tuesday afternoon, I was updating the firm's server security when I intercepted an email from Alan to the other partners. He was recommending Julia for promotion to senior paralegal, citing her exceptional dedication and willingness to go above and beyond normal responsibilities. The promotion would come with a significant salary increase and, more importantly, would make Julia feel untouchable. It would also make her eventual fall much more devastating. I forwarded the email to Sophie with a simple message. It's time. Her response came within minutes. Agreed, initiate Phase 2. Phase 2 was elegant in its simplicity. Instead of exposing Alan and Julia directly, we would let them destroy themselves. I started by making subtle changes to the firm's email system. Nothing dramatic, just small modifications that would cause certain messages to be automatically forwarded to additional recipients. Alan's next inappropriate email to Julia would be copied to the firm's HR director. His expense reports would be automatically flagged for audit review. Meanwhile, Sophie began her own campaign. As Alan's wife, she had legitimate access to his personal calendar and social media accounts. She started accepting invitations to firm events he'd been avoiding, making herself visible to his colleagues and clients. More importantly, she began asking innocent questions about his work schedule, creating a public record of the discrepancies between his claimed activities and his actual whereabouts. Wednesday evening, Julia came home later than usual, practically glowing with excitement. Alan recommended me for promotion, she announced, pouring herself a glass of wine. Senior paralegal, with a 15% salary increase. That's wonderful, I said, meaning it. The higher she climbed, the farther she'd fall. He says I've shown exceptional commitment to the firm. He's really noticed my extra efforts. I'm sure he has. She looked at me sharply. You don't sound very enthusiastic. I'm thrilled for you, Julia. You've worked hard for this opportunity. Yes, I have, and it's just the beginning. Alan thinks I have real potential for even greater advancement. Partnership track? Eventually, yes. He's been mentoring me, helping me understand the business side of the practice. He thinks I could be running my own department within 5 years. I nodded and smiled, playing the role of the supportive husband while mentally calculating how long it would take for everything to collapse. We should celebrate, I said. Dinner at Chez Laurent this weekend? Chez Laurent was the most expensive restaurant in town, the kind of place Julia loved, but we rarely visited. Her face lit up with genuine pleasure. Really? That would be wonderful. You deserve it. Besides, we should enjoy these moments while we can. What do you mean? Nothing, just that life changes so quickly sometimes. One day everything seems settled, and the next day your whole world is different. Julia studied my face, and for a moment I thought she might ask what I really meant. But then her phone buzzed with a text message, and her attention shifted. Alan wants to review some case files tonight. I might be late. Of course he does. She looked up from her phone. Mark, is everything okay? You've been acting strange lately. Strange how? I don't know. Different. Like you're planning something. I smiled and kissed her forehead. Just thinking about the future, about what comes next for both of us. Well, what comes next is my promotion, and hopefully many more opportunities at the firm. I'm sure you're right. After she left for her case review, I opened my laptop and checked the monitoring systems. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. Alan's communications were being logged and forwarded. Sophie was building her public case for his unreliability, and Julia was walking deeper into a trap of her own making. My phone rang around 10 o'clock. Sophie's number. How are you holding up? She asked. Better than expected. You? I'm looking forward to Friday. Friday was when Alan's expense reports would be reviewed by the firm's financial committee, the same committee that would receive copies of his inappropriate emails and questionable billing practices. Any second thoughts? I asked. None. Alan made his choice when he decided our marriage was disposable. Julia made hers when she decided to help him dispose of it. And after Friday? After Friday, they'll both discover that some decisions can't be undone. I hung up and walked to the window, looking out at our quiet suburban street. In a few days, everything would change. Julia would lose her job, her future, and her marriage. Alan would face professional disgrace and financial ruin. And I would finally be free of the woman who thought I wasn't strong enough for her. The irony was perfect. Julia had always been the planner in our relationship, the one who thought 3 steps ahead while I just reacted to whatever she decided. But she'd forgotten that I was the one who built the systems that made her plans possible. And now I was going to use those same systems to tear her carefully constructed future apart. Friday morning arrived with unseasonable warmth and the kind of clear blue sky that made everything seem possible. Julia left for work actually humming, while she gathered her files for what she believed would be a routine day at the office. I knew better. At exactly 9:15 a.m., the firm's financial committee would convene for their monthly review of expense reports and billing irregularities. At 9:30, they would receive an automatically generated summary of questionable charges from the past quarter, with Alan Ryder's name appearing frequently. At 10:00, HR Director Patricia Morse would find several forwarded emails in her inbox that would require immediate investigation. By lunchtime, Alan's carefully constructed world would be cracking at the foundations. I spent the morning in my office, monitoring network traffic and pretending to work on routine maintenance tasks. At 10:47, I intercepted an urgent email from Patricia Morse to senior partner William Whitmore. Need to discuss personnel matter immediately. Confidential. At 11:23, Alan's computer accessed the firm's employee handbook section on disciplinary procedures. At 11:58, Julia's workstation searched for wrongful termination lawyers. The dominoes were falling exactly as Sophie and I had planned. My phone buzzed with a text from Rob. "Still on for lunch? You sounded stressed yesterday." I'd called Rob the night before, needing to talk to someone who knew me well enough to understand what I was going through. I hadn't told him everything. Rob had a tendency to solve problems with his fists rather than his brain, but I'd hinted that major changes were coming in my marriage. "Definitely. Meet you at Murphy's at noon." Murphy's Tavern was the kind of blue-collar bar where construction workers and mechanics grabbed lunch between jobs. Rob fit right in with his work clothes and calloused hands, while I always felt slightly out of place in my button-down shirts and clean fingernails. But today, I felt different, stronger. "You look like someone who just won the lottery," Rob said as I slid into the booth across from him. "What's going on?" "Julia's having an affair." Rob's beer mug stopped halfway to his mouth. "You sure?" "Completely. With her boss. Has been for months. That piece of garbage. I never liked her, Mark. You know that, right? Always thought she treated you like hired help instead of a husband." "I know." "So, what are you going to do? Please tell me you're not going to try to work it out. Please tell me you're finally going to grow a spine and dump her cheating rear end." I smiled. "Something like that." Rob studied my face, his expression growing more concerned. "Mark, what did you do?" "Nothing illegal. Nothing that will hurt anyone who doesn't deserve it. But Julia and her boyfriend are about to learn that some people shouldn't be underestimated." "Explain." I gave him the abbreviated version, the tracking, the evidence, the partnership with Sophie, and the systematic exposure of Alan's professional misconduct. Rob listened without interruption, his expression shifting from concern to admiration. "You sneaky genius," he said when I finished. "She has no idea what's coming, does she?" "None whatsoever. She thinks she's about to become the wife of a senior partner. Instead, she's going to be an unemployed adulteress married to the IT guy she never respected. And then? And then she'll have to decide if she wants to stay married to someone who's stronger than her, after all." My phone rang, Julia's number. "Hi, honey," I answered, winking at Rob. "Mark, something's happening at the office. Alan's been called into a meeting with the senior partners. People are acting strange." "Strange how?" "Whispers in the hallways. Patricia from HR keeps looking at me funny, and someone said there might be an investigation into expense account irregularities." "That sounds serious." "It is serious. If there's some kind of financial scandal, it could affect everyone in the firm, including my promotion." "I'm sure it will all work out." "How can you be so calm? This could ruin everything I've worked for." "Julia, whatever happens, happens. You can't control everything." There was a long pause. When she spoke again, her voice was sharper. "Sometimes I think you'd be happy if my career fell apart. Then you wouldn't have to feel inadequate about your own lack of ambition." Rob raised his eyebrows, having heard enough of the conversation to understand Julia's tone. "That's not true," I said calmly. "I want you to be happy. I want you to get exactly what you deserve. I have to go. Alan's meeting is over and he looks upset." The line went silent. I set the phone on the table and took a long drink of my beer. "She still doesn't get it," Rob said. "She will." We finished lunch while I explained the rest of the plan. Rob's role would be simple but crucial. He would provide an alibi for my whereabouts during the key moments of Alan and Julia's downfall. If anyone asked, I'd been at his garage all afternoon, helping with a computer problem. "What about after?" Rob asked as we prepared to leave. "When the dust settles and Julia realizes what happened?" "That depends on Julia." "You think she'll stay?" "I think she'll try to. Where else is she going to go? She'll be unemployed, unemployable at any other law firm in town, and her boyfriend will be facing professional ruin. She'll need someone to take care of her." "And you're going to do that? After everything she's done?" "I'm going to give her the same consideration she's given me." Rob grinned. This is going to be interesting. I returned to the office to find the building buzzing with nervous energy. Conversation stopped when I walked past, and several people asked if I'd heard anything about the investigation. I played dumb, expressing concern about the firm's stability, while internally monitoring the electronic communications that were sealing Alan's fate. At 3:17 p.m., Alan Ryder was escorted from the building by security, carrying a single cardboard box containing his personal items. Through my basement window, I watched him load the box into his BMW with shaking hands. At 3:45 p.m., Julia was called to Patricia Morse's office. At 4:22 p.m., Julia emerged from that meeting looking like she'd been struck by lightning. At 4:30 p.m., she was also escorted from the building. I waited until 5 p.m. before leaving my office, taking the elevator to the main floor where several colleagues were gathered near the reception area, discussing the day's events in hushed tones. "Terrible business," said Margaret from accounting. "Alan seemed like such a professional man." "It's the quiet ones you have to watch," replied Dave from litigation. "Though I have to say I'm not entirely surprised about the paralegal. She always seemed a bit too ambitious for her position." I expressed appropriate shock and concern, gathered my things, and drove home to wait for Julia. She arrived at 6:47 p.m., her face streaked with tears and her professional composure completely shattered. She stumbled through the front door like someone fleeing a disaster, which in a way she was. "They fired me," she said, collapsing onto our couch. "They fired both of us." "What happened?" "Some kind of investigation. Expense account fraud. Inappropriate relationships with colleagues, violations of professional conduct. They had emails, Mark, private emails between Alan and me." "How is that possible?" "I don't know. Someone must have been monitoring our communications. Alan thinks it might have been his wife. She's been acting strange lately, showing up to firm events, asking questions about his schedule." I sat down beside her, offering the comfort of a concerned husband. "What does this mean for your future?" "What future?" Julia's voice cracked. "I'll never work at another law firm. Not after being terminated for an inappropriate relationship with a partner. My career is over." "And Alan?" "Alan's ruined. The state bar is launching an investigation. He could lose his license. His wife is filing for divorce." She looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "He says he can't see me anymore. Says we need to avoid any contact until the investigations are complete." "I'm sorry." "Are you? Are you really sorry, Mark? Because you don't sound sorry. You sound almost satisfied." I met her gaze steadily. "I'm sorry that you're hurting. I'm sorry that your choices led to this outcome, but I'm not sorry that the truth finally came out." Julia's face went pale. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that actions have consequences. You chose to have an affair with a married man. You chose to risk your career for someone who was never going to leave his wife for you. You chose to treat your husband like he was beneath your consideration." "You knew?" "I've known for months." She stared at me in shock, her mind clearly racing through the implications. "How long have you known?" "Long enough to document everything, long enough to prepare for this moment. You did this. Somehow you orchestrated this whole thing." I smiled. "I didn't make Alan steal from the firm. I didn't make you send inappropriate emails on company computers. I didn't make either of you lie to your spouses and colleagues. All I did was make sure the truth came to light." Julia stood up abruptly, pacing to the window and back. "You vindictive little man. You couldn't stand that I found someone better than you, so you destroyed both our lives." "Better than me? Alan abandoned you the moment things got difficult. He threw you away to protect himself. Is that really better? At least he has ambition. At least he's not content to spend his life in a basement fixing other people's computers. Those computers you're so dismissive of, they're what made this possible. Every email you sent, every lie you told, every secret you thought was safe, it all went through systems I control." The realization hit her like a physical blow. She sank back onto the couch, her face cycling through emotions: anger, fear, disbelief, and finally a kind of grudging respect. "You're not the man I married," she said quietly. "No," I agreed. "I'm not. The man you married would have suffered in silence while you destroyed our marriage. The man you married would have let you walk all over him while you built a new life with someone else. And this man? What does this man want? This man wants his wife to understand that he's stronger than she thought, in every way that matters." Julia stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her calculating, trying to figure out her options. Where could she go? Who would take her in? How would she survive without a job or prospects? "What happens now?" she asked finally. "That depends on you." You want me to stay after everything that's happened? I want you to decide what kind of person you really are. Are you someone who takes responsibility for her choices, or are you someone who blames others when her schemes fall apart? Julia was quiet for several minutes, staring out the window at our ordinary suburban street. When she spoke again, her voice was different, smaller, more uncertain. I can't go back to who I was before this started. I know. And you can't go back to being the man who would tolerate being treated the way I treated you. I know that too. She turned to look at me, really look at me, perhaps for the first time in years. So what do? We figure out if there's anything left worth saving, or we end this marriage honestly, instead of with lies and betrayal. Julia nodded slowly. And in the meantime? In the meantime, you might want to think about what you're going to tell people when they ask what happened, because by tomorrow, everyone in town will know that Alan Ryder and his paralegal were fired for having an affair. Her face went white. Everyone will know. Small town, big scandal. Yes, everyone will know. Julia put her head in her hands, and for the first time since I'd known her, she looked truly defeated. I never thought you were capable of something like this. Neither did I. But then, I never thought you were capable of what you did either. So we're both different people now? Yes. The question is whether these new people can find a way to live together. Julia looked up at me, and in her eyes I saw something I hadn't seen in years. Uncertainty. For the first time in our marriage, she didn't know what came next, and for the first time in our marriage, neither did I. But I knew one thing for certain. I was finally strong enough to handle whatever came next. The next morning brought reporters. I discovered them when I opened the front door to retrieve the newspaper. 2 people with cameras and notepads standing on our lawn like they belonged there. One was a young woman with aggressive blonde highlights and the predatory smile of someone who'd found fresh prey. The other was a middle-aged man with the weathered look of a career journalist who'd covered too many small-town scandals. Mr. Garvey, I'm Linda Morrison from Channel 7 News. We'd like to ask you a few questions about the situation at Whitmore, Daniels, and Associates. I stepped back and started to close the door, but the male reporter called out, We understand your wife was involved in the relationship that led to yesterday's terminations. Do you have any comment? Through the window, I could see Julia frozen at our kitchen table, coffee mug halfway to her lips, staring at the scene on our front lawn. No comment, I said firmly, closing the door and turning the deadbolt. Mark? Julia's voice was barely a whisper. How did they find out so quickly? Small town, big law firm, respected partner caught in a scandal. I walked to the kitchen and poured myself coffee with steady hands. Did you really think this would stay quiet? She set down her mug with shaking fingers. I hoped, maybe it would just be handled internally. Julia, Alan Ryder has been the face of that firm for 15 years. He's handled cases for half the business owners in town. When someone like that falls, it makes news. My phone rang. Rob's number. You see the news? He asked without preamble. It's on the news? Channel 7 ran it as their lead story this morning. Prominent attorney terminated in ethics scandal. They're not naming names yet, but everyone knows it's Alan, and they mentioned that a paralegal was also terminated for inappropriate conduct. I looked at Julia, who had gone pale. Thanks for the heads up. You okay? Need anything? We're fine, just dealing with some unexpected attention. Call if you need me. And Mark? Whatever you're feeling right now, remember that she brought this on herself. After I hung up, Julia stared at me with something approaching desperation. What am I going to do? I can't leave the house. I can't go anywhere without people staring and whispering. You could start by telling the truth. What truth? That I made a mistake? That I got involved with someone I shouldn't have? You could start by acknowledging that it wasn't a mistake. It was a choice, a series of choices made over months, while you lied to everyone who trusted you. Julia's face flushed with anger. Don't lecture me about choices, Mark. You chose to spy on me. You chose to sabotage my career. You chose to humiliate me publicly. I chose to stop enabling your lies. By destroying my life? By letting you face the consequences of your own actions. We were interrupted by a knock at the door. Through the peephole, I could see Sophie Ryder standing on our front porch, dressed in an elegant black coat, and looking like she was attending a funeral. It's Sophie, I told Julia. I can't see her. I can't face her after what I did to her marriage. Then go upstairs. Julia fled toward the staircase while I opened the door. Sophie stepped inside quickly, glancing around to make sure the reporters hadn't followed her. How are you holding up? She asked. Better than expected. You? Remarkably well, actually. I filed for divorce yesterday afternoon. My attorney says the evidence we gathered will make the proceedings very straightforward. And Alan? Sophie's smile was sharp as a blade. Alan is discovering that his professional reputation was more fragile than he realized. 3 major clients have already terminated their relationships with the firm. The state bar investigation will likely take months, during which he'll be suspended from practice. Sounds like everything went according to plan. Better than planned, actually. I didn't expect the media attention, but it's certainly ensuring that everyone knows exactly what kind of man he really is. From upstairs came the sound of Julia's footsteps pacing back and forth in our bedroom. How is she handling it? Sophie asked. About as well as you'd expect. Reality is setting in. Good. She needs to understand that actions have consequences. Sophie moved to our living room window, looking out at the reporters who were still camped on our lawn. I have a proposition for you, Mark. What kind of proposition? Alan's clients aren't just leaving him. They're looking for new representation, quality legal services with proper ethical standards. I'm thinking of starting my own firm. I raised an eyebrow. You're not a lawyer. No, but I have a law degree I never used, and I know more about running a legal practice than most attorneys. What I need is someone to handle the business side, technology, client management, financial systems. You're offering me a job? I'm offering you a partnership. Ryder and Associates is going to need a complete rebranding, and I think Ryder and Garvey has a nice ring to it. The offer was tempting, a chance to escape the basement office where I'd spent years being overlooked and undervalued, but it also felt like another form of revenge against Julia and Alan. What makes you think I'm qualified to run a law firm? You just orchestrated the downfall of one of the most powerful attorneys in the state using nothing but technical skills and careful planning. I'd say you're overqualified. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. We need to talk. Meet me at the construction site on Riverside Drive at 8 p.m. Come alone. I showed the message to Sophie, who read it with growing concern. He's desperate, she said. Desperate people make poor decisions. You think he's dangerous? I think he's a narcissist who's watching his entire world collapse. That can make anyone dangerous. From upstairs came the sound of Julia's voice, talking on the phone. The conversation was too muted to make out words, but her tone was pleading. She's probably calling everyone she knows, trying to find someone who'll take her in, Sophie said. Let her. She needs to understand exactly how few real friends she has. Sophie gathered her coat and headed for the door. Think about my offer, Mark. We could build something good out of all this destruction. After she left, I went upstairs to find Julia sitting on our bed, surrounded by packed suitcases. Going somewhere? My sister's house in Portland. Just until this all blows over. When will that be? I don't know. A few weeks? A month? However long it takes for people to forget. People don't forget, Julia. They move on to the next scandal, but they don't forget. She looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. I can't stay here, Mark. I can't face the stares and whispers and judgment. I need time to figure out what comes next. And us? What happens to our marriage while you're figuring things out? I don't know. I honestly don't know if there's anything left to save. There might be, but not if you run away instead of dealing with what you've done. Julia stood up and walked to our bedroom window, looking down at the reporters who were still maintaining their vigil on our lawn. How do you do it? She asked. How do you stay so calm while everything falls apart? Because I'm not the one who caused it to fall apart. But you're the one who made sure it happened publicly. You're the one who turned a private matter into a public scandal. A private matter. Julia, you were having an affair with your married boss while lying to your husband and his wife. That stopped being private the moment you involved other people in your deception. She turned to face me, and for a moment I saw a flash of the woman I'd married. Vulnerable, uncertain, looking for someone to tell her everything would be okay. What if I stayed? What if I tried to make this right? How would you do that? I could take responsibility publicly. I could apologize to Sophie, to you, to everyone I hurt. You could. But would you mean it? Or would you just be saying what you think people want to hear? Julia was quiet for a long moment, considering the question. I don't know, she said finally. I've been lying for so long. I'm not sure I remember how to tell the truth. It was the most honest thing she'd said to me in months. Then maybe Portland is the right choice, I said. Maybe you need time away from here to figure out who you really are. And you? What will you do? I'll be here when you decide what you want. Even after everything that's happened? Julia, I'm not the same man you married, but I'm also not someone who gives up on people I care about. If you can find a way to be honest, with me, with yourself, with everyone you've hurt, then maybe we can find a way forward. And if I can't? Then at least we'll both know where we stand. Julia nodded and returned to her packing. As I watched her fold clothes and gather belongings, I realized that this might be the last time I saw her in our bedroom as my wife. The thought should have made me sad. Instead, I felt something closer to relief. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Alan. 8 p.m. Don't disappoint me. I looked at Julia, bent over her suitcase, and made a decision. I have to go out tonight. Business meeting. With who? Someone who wants to discuss the future. She looked up sharply. Mark, be careful. People are angry about what happened. Some of them might blame you for the investigation. I can handle myself. Can you? Because the man I married wouldn't have been able to handle what you've done this week. She was right. The man she'd married would have hidden in this house, avoiding confrontation and hoping the scandal would blow over. But that man was gone, replaced by someone who was finally strong enough to face whatever came next, even if what came next was a desperate man with nothing left to lose. The construction site on Riverside Drive was a skeleton of steel beams and concrete foundations lit by harsh work lights that cast long shadows across the muddy ground. I arrived at 7:55 p.m., parking my truck near the chain-link fence and walking through the gap where the gate should have been. Alan's BMW was already there, parked behind a pile of construction materials like he was trying to hide it. I found him standing near the foundation of what would eventually become another luxury home in Riverside Estates, smoking a cigarette with shaking hands. He looked terrible. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled and stained. The confident, commanding presence that had made him successful in courtrooms had been replaced by something desperate and cornered. You came, he said, dropping the cigarette and grinding it under his heel. You asked me to. I asked you to because we need to reach an understanding. What kind of understanding? Alan stepped closer, and I could smell alcohol on his breath. The kind where you call off your dogs and let the situation resolve itself quietly. I'm not sure what you mean. Don't play stupid with me, Mark. I know you're behind this. The investigation, the leaked emails, the media attention. It's too coordinated to be coincidence. I leaned against a concrete pillar, adopting the casual pose that had become my signature. Alan, you embezzled money from your firm and had an affair with an employee. I didn't make you do either of those things. But you made sure everyone found out about them. I made sure the truth came to light. There's a difference. Alan's face flushed with anger. The truth? You want to talk about truth? The truth is that your wife came to me. She pursued me, not the other way around. She was the one who was unhappy in her marriage, looking for something better. Something better than me, you mean? Yes, exactly. Julia deserved more than being married to some basement-dwelling computer technician who couldn't even satisfy his own wife. The insult hit exactly where Alan intended, but I just smiled. And yet here you are, meeting me in a construction site like some common criminal while I'm the one who still has a job and a future. You think you've won? You think destroying my career makes you the better man? I think letting you destroy your own career makes me the smarter man. Alan pulled out his phone and showed me the screen. I have something you might want to see. It was a video file, security footage from what looked like a hotel room. The timestamp showed it was from several weeks ago, and I could see two figures on a bed, clearly engaged in intimate activities. Julia was very accommodating during our time together, Alan said with a cruel smile. Very willing to try new things. I thought you might like to see exactly what you were missing at home. The attempt at humiliation was so pathetic that I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Is that supposed to upset me? Alan, I've known about your affair for months. I've seen your emails, your text messages, your expense reports for hotel rooms. Did you really think a video like that would surprise me? Alan's confident expression faltered. Your wife preferred me to you in every way that mattered. My wife preferred the fantasy you sold her, the promise of partnership, of wealth, of a lifestyle you were never going to provide. She fell in love with a lie. I could have given her everything she wanted. You couldn't even give her job security. The moment things got difficult, you threw her away to protect yourself. Some prize she won. Alan's phone buzzed with an incoming call. He glanced at the screen and declined it, but not before I saw the caller ID. Sophie. Your wife's been trying to reach you. My soon-to-be ex-wife. She's been calling all day, probably to gloat about the divorce papers. Or maybe to tell you about her new business venture. Alan's face went pale. What business venture? She's starting her own law firm, taking your clients, your reputation, everything you built. She asked me to be her business partner. You're lying. I pulled out my phone and showed him the text messages Sophie and I had exchanged that afternoon, discussing client lists and office space. Alan read them with growing horror. She can't do this. Those are my clients. We're your clients. Now they're looking for representation from someone with better ethical standards. This is insane. Sophie doesn't know anything about running a law practice. She knows more than you think. She also knows exactly how to destroy what's left of your reputation if you try to interfere with her plans. Alan stared at the messages for several seconds, his mind clearly racing through the implications. When he looked up, his eyes had a wild, desperate quality that made me take a step back. You did this. You turned my own wife against me. I didn't have to turn her against you, Alan. You did that yourself when you decided to cheat on her with my wife. I'll ruin you. I'll make sure everyone knows you're behind this whole thing. Go ahead. Tell everyone that the basement-dwelling computer technician outsmarted the great Alan Ryder. I'm sure that will help your reputation. Alan lunged forward, grabbing me by the shirt. You think you're so clever, don't you? You think you've won? I looked down at his hands on my shirt, then back up at his face. Alan, let go of me. Or what? You'll call the police? You'll have me arrested? Go ahead. At this point, what difference does it make? The difference is that there are security cameras on this construction site, and right now you're committing assault in front of them. Alan's grip loosened slightly as he glanced around, looking for the cameras I'd mentioned. You're bluffing. Am I? You're the one who taught me that successful people always have insurance policies. Alan released me and stepped back, his breathing heavy and erratic. What do you want from me? I want you to disappear, leave town, start over somewhere else, and never contact my wife again. And if I don't? Then Sophie and I will make sure the state bar investigation uncovers every unethical thing you've ever done. We'll make sure every potential employer knows exactly why you were terminated. We'll make sure you never practice law again. Alan was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the lights of town spread below us. Julia really chose you over me? Julia didn't choose anyone. She's in Portland, trying to figure out what comes next. But when she's ready to make a real choice, it won't be based on lies and promises you can't keep. She'll come back to you? Maybe, maybe not. But either way, she'll be making an honest decision instead of living in a fantasy. Alan walked back to his car, moving like a man who'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. He paused at the driver's door and called back to me. You know this won't make you happy, right? Destroying my life won't fix your marriage. This was never about fixing my marriage, Alan. This was about making sure you and Julia face the consequences of your choices. And now? Now you get to live with those consequences. Alan drove away without another word, his taillights disappearing into the darkness. I stood in the construction site for several more minutes, looking out at the town where I'd lived my entire adult life. Tomorrow, the reporters would probably find new scandals to cover. The gossip would eventually fade. Julia would decide whether to come home or start over somewhere else. But tonight, for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. And my phone rang as I walked back to my truck. Sophie's number. How did it go? She asked. About as well as expected. He's scared, desperate, and probably leaving town soon. Good. I filed the final divorce papers this afternoon. My attorney says we should have everything settled within 60 days. And the new firm? I signed a lease on office space downtown. We can start moving in next week if you're still interested in the partnership. I looked back at the construction site where Alan and I had just played out the final scene of his downfall. 6 months ago, I would never have imagined myself capable of orchestrating something like this. 6 months ago, I was a different person. I'm interested. Excellent. I think we're going to build something remarkable together. After Sophie hung up, I drove home through streets that looked exactly the same as they had that morning, but somehow felt completely different. The reporters had finally given up their vigil on my lawn, leaving behind only tire tracks in the grass and a few pieces of litter. Inside, the house was quiet. Julia's suitcases were gone from our bedroom, along with most of her clothes and personal items. She'd left a note on the kitchen counter. Mark, I need time to think about everything that's happened. I don't know when I'll be back or if I'll be back. I'm sorry for the pain I've caused you, but I'm not sorry for wanting more than what we had. Maybe that makes me a terrible person. I don't know anymore. J. I read the note twice, then folded it and put it in my desk drawer next to all the other evidence I'd collected over the past few months. Someday, when enough time had passed, I might look back on all of this and try to understand how we'd gotten here. But not tonight. Tonight, I opened a beer and sat in my living room, thinking about Sophie's offer and the future we might build together. A future based on honesty instead of lies, on mutual respect instead of manipulation. A future where I wouldn't have to prove I was strong enough for anyone except myself. My phone buzzed with one final message of the day. Rob's number. Saw the news about Alan leaving town. You okay? I typed back, better than okay, ready for whatever comes next. And for the first time in years, I actually meant it. The story was over. Julia and Alan had made their choices and faced the consequences. I had proven, to them and to myself, that I was stronger than anyone had imagined. Now it was time to find out what I could build with that strength.